be probably seeing you a number of other times during the time that you're here. I think, Dr. To, you would like one of the fellows to take some notes here and perhaps be a recorder. Is that, am I correct in that, so that they can make a presentation when we get out of the breakout room?
I think just summarize 1 or 2 points about the most important point of the discussion. So we don't need to summarize the whole meeting because there's not enough time.
Okay.
That's fine. We can all collectively decide who will speak up.
Okay. Okay. So this is my charge to you. You obviously heard my remarks, and I think what's important now is for me to become silent and to listen to you in terms of this question about to what extent do you and your countrymen and women in your country are to what extent do they see democracy evolving and developing, and to what extent are they willing to make, I guess the term that I use, compromises, or perhaps take a slow evolution towards democracy rather than a quick Western model that can be used from Great Britain or the United States or France or other countries. The question is, authoritarianism is increasingly solidified in many countries, not only just in sub-Saharan Africa, but other places as well. So how do you and the people in your country, how do they feel about working towards moving away from authoritarianism towards a more democratic society, and how speedily, how quickly do you think that can be achieved, or what kind of compromises or what type of implementation is the appropriate way in order to move to a more democratic society, which I think most of us would agree is a desire, is a goal for any country as far as that's concerned, rather than to be mired in authoritarianism and a cruel leadership that is based on violence and repression and lack of individual rights. So I'll stop there, and I'll let all of you share your thoughts on this. So please go right ahead. Unmute yourself, and we'll talk as hopefully within the next 15-20 minutes. No volunteers here yet?
Okay, maybe I can start. Can I go ahead?
Yes.
Please,
Yes.
please.
All right. Okay, thank you so much. I'm Charles Wally, Liberia, and I'm happy to be here once again. I work deeply in education, mainly. So we joined the presentation like the previous section 10 minutes late because of some difficulties joining. But I think the topic is very interesting, especially in Africa, where democracy has been perceived differently or in different ways. In my country, to what extent the seed of democracy is taking root, or to what extent it is evolving, it's growing and all that. I would say first, yes, there is some level of improvement. I realized before people only used to vote or only used to elect officials on the basis of friendship, on the basis of tribe, language, or some family connections. And that in a way does not consider the person's honesty, competence, and other qualities that they bring on board to be able to support the work that should be done for change. In some way that is improving, even though to some extent people still go about choosing people who are somehow connected to them and they call it interest, but gradually that is changing. Secondly, one thing I also realized with our democracy is that people are getting smarter. Initially, I observed in our democracy here in Liberia, for example, when the election period is coming, that's when the politicians and others will move out, will get people's support. And the people already know that all these years you have not been with us, you have not been contributing to what we're doing. And so you are just coming here to quote unquote buy our votes. So in that way, even politicians, those who can come to them last minute or those who they have elected previously and they're not seeking re-election, they normally don't give them the chance, which also strengthens or solidifies the democracy we are trying to push, because this is a matter of responsibility. When you are given a chance to serve, you should be able to serve. On the changes or amendments or advances that will be possibly made, I think people are somehow open to some of the changes, some of the flexibility. One confusion always coming in when people think that, well, you know, I think too much democracy is not good for the population and all that. Reason being, some people feel that you know, too much compromises like the law, the few other things, and people having rights on everything they say things. Sometimes they forget the responsibility part to also undermine the situation. But to some extent, there are some level of improvement. So yes, taking from more authoritative rule to a more democratic rule is somehow, you know, gradually growing in my understanding. But still, people still feel that the leader should put his feet to fire when it comes to some matters and take them head on, because sometimes leniency in some areas or counties or the provinces can be somehow dangerous. So that's what I want to contribute for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those comments. We appreciate it.
Okay,
Now-
can I go next?
Yes.
Please, please.
I'm coming from, I'm Simche, and I'm coming from Sierra Leone. To be specific, Sierra Leone is a very nice country, and we have lots of mineral resources. We have nice beaches. But when it comes to democracy, it's like we're still crawling. We still have a long way to go. Women specifically are being left out, more especially when it comes to political position. We still have towns, we still have cities wherein women are not allowed to hold leadership positions. They are not voted for, despite sensitizations and advocacy that have been going on women's rights. And also when it comes to democracy, youths are being left out. It's like, for you to aspire for presidency, you have to be 40 years and above. And not only presidents, you have some like parliamentarians, you have to be 40 years old. And the rights of citizens is often being, when you speak out, you often be marginalized, and we will get there someday, I believe, but so much has to be done. Even the recent underlying factor we are having that is affecting our democratic government is tribalism. It's like people are more closer to their political, they are more political alliance than the country. That's also is affecting the nation. Recently, they passed a bill on freedom of speech for the media, but that too is not working because sycophancy is another big challenge that is affecting our democracy. Citizens want to support the government of the day. Even leaders who should be advocates, people working in public services, they are more pertinent about parties than the services the services they are giving to the nation, which has made it impossible for, even if the government of the day is doing bad, no one will stand against them to say this is wrong. Corruption also is another issue affecting our democracy. When it comes to civil society, who should be strong advocates, the government of the day will just buy them over, and that's the end. So it's a big challenge, but we'll get there when the youth and the women, their mindsets are being changed when they are, if we empower them enough with lots of civic education about what democracy is and how we as citizens should hold, it's our responsibility to look out for our country rather than pledging our allegiance to our political parties. So political parties are the ones who are destroying the democracy of the nation. Thank you.
Shimche, thanks very much for your thoughts. It's very, very helpful. Thank you. Will there be anyone else would like to comment on the state of democracy and Chisom, please.
Yeah, good evening, everyone. My name is Chisom from Nigeria. Hi. Okay, so for us here in Nigeria, it's basically a case of free and fair elections. So we've had democracy since 1999, but most of the elections are never really free. And yeah, people go to vote and all of that. But like Simche said, it's mostly based on tribalism and party line. So people don't vote, people don't get their votes to count. So young people, okay, I'm sure you heard about the EndSARS protest and all of that happened in Nigeria. All of that had to do with bad government in the end. That was what it was about. So for us here in Nigeria, it's not really about the democracy. We've had that, but we've never really had the free and the fair elections that we always wanted. So now we're going to the polls again in 2023, and everyone is skeptical. Will our votes count? I always vote, but just because I don't know if my votes will count, but I just go out to vote. And so that is just the feeling that we have. We just need to make sure that that our votes count. For us, that's our greatest fear. Yes, there was a bill that was passed, the Not Too Young to Run bill. So young people can actually, if you're from 24, you can actually run for a post. But does it really work here in Nigeria? Well, the answer is no. There's that bill, but it's not working. And then recently, for the past 4 years, there's been an electoral change bill. They're supposed to have changed the way we run our elections, make it more open, transparent. You can vote from wherever you are instead of traveling to go and vote where you registered. So all of those things, the president has refused to sign that bill, has refused to make it a law. And we know that will also hinder the 2023 election. So for us here in Nigeria, it's basically about the freedom to, really vote and then get our votes to count. So basically, and then, yes, of course, women still have very little participation in politics and democracy here in Nigeria. So, as House of Assembly, you probably have just about 8 women out of 336. So the participation level is very low. And well, recently they said they created more spaces for the women to participate. So we're hoping that works as well. So these are just the major challenges for us here in Nigeria. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
I guess I can.
Thought Alan had his hand up. Alan, please.
Yes. I'm Alan. I'm coming from Zambia, and making a comment in line with democracy here in Zambia. I would say since our country became democratic in 1991, we have seen the change of power from one government to another without much difficulty. Those that have lost elections have admitted or have accepted the change of power. However, my comment is that our democracy is still very, very young, in the sense that there is no visible separation of powers between the 3 arms of government. That's the executive, the legislative, and the judiciary. So what it is that the president actually appoints the heads of those 3 arms of government, or the 2 arms of government, because him is in the executive. So what usually happens is that those that are appointed are actually loyal to the appointing authority, even when certain decisions should have been made against, say, the executive. There's that some form of twisting to please those that are actually appointing authority. So this trickles down to even in the civil service at the level of the permanent, those that head ministries. You discover that the permanent secretaries are equally appointed by the president. So you find that when it reaches a situation where they need to execute certain duties, you discover that their allegiance is not really to the people, but their allegiance is actually aligned to the people that appoint them. So in that sense, I would say our democracy is still very young and needs a lot to change. And then commenting on how best this can change, of course, it will take a lot of effort. We have seen civil society organizations within our country pushing the agenda to ensure that people are there's inclusion and there's women participation and the like, but still the numbers of women that are actually participating is very low, probably because in the manner that we tend to practice our elections, you tend to find that there's some incidences of violence that are actually witnessed, and this makes women and youth to draw back and not really fully participate. So we are still, I would say, in the infancy stage, but in terms of the change of power from one government to the other, I think that one, I would say we are above 50 or 60%. So I think that would be my comment for now.
I think Shigo has her hands up, yes.
Dr. To, we've got some more time yet, right?
Yeah,
I think.
yeah, 5 more minutes. Shigo, yes, please.
Okay.
Good morning and evening, everybody.
Yes.
I am from South Africa. South Africa has had quite a unique history in that we came out of an apartheid system, and in 1994, out of the apartheid system, we had an advent of a constitutional democracy and a constitution which is hailed around the world as being quite progressive. Despite this, and I think because of our legacy of apartheid, we then had a single party that came out, which was the ANC, and they, of course, had been the Liberation Party, as it were. And so there wasn't a strong opposition, and we still sit in a position where the ANC doesn't have a strong opposition to their power. And because of a very weak opposition, this has made our democracy and I suppose our government susceptible to corruption, susceptible to the phenomenon we've seen over the past year, which in our country has been called state capture, where outsiders have been said to have captured our state and to control our state. We've seen our courts have to zealously protect our democracy and zealously protect our constitution. And I think the courts and civil society have had to do quite a lot of work over the past few years to kind of protect our democracy outside of a strong opposition. Because there isn't a strong opposition, this job has had to be done by the courts and by civil society, who have had to protect the rule of law, protect our constitution. We have in the past, maybe recently, seen smaller organizations coming out trying to be an opposition. And so I think for a healthy democracy, you do need a strong opposition parties, you need a strong civil society, and of course, courts who are not shy to protect that democracy and protect the foundation of it. Thanks. That's mine.
If I could ask all of you here just to respond, how would you describe the passion among the people in your country for democracy? Are they passionate about achieving it, or not as passionate? And as a follow-up, if your authoritarian leader, if your leader in your country brings about a level of prosperity in an authoritarian manner, in a non-democratic manner, is that okay? Is that okay? Would the people generally say, well, maybe it's okay to have a good economy rather than a constitution or a free election?
In South Africa, if I may go and I'll answer first. In South Africa, we've seen a lot of voter apathy. So people not voting, people not being involved in the democracy. But I think it's that phenomenon of where your own liberator or or people who you saw as your liberator are the people who end up then not meeting the promises which the people forged together with them. And so I must say, and a lot of literature does say, that South African citizens are not very democratically involved and don't get involved in those processes. And I think that also then eats away at our democracy.
Anyone else to describe how
Yes,
passionate are the people in your country towards democracy?
If I talk a little bit about, sorry, I'm Hidayah from Djibouti. If I talk a little bit about the democracy in Djibouti, well, we are seeing some new era that has begun in Djibouti, and that of a full multi-party system, especially in the political landscape. Well, after 15 years of unitary rule and 10 years of experimentation with four-party democracy, the Republic of Djibouti is moving up a gear. And as Alan said, our democracy is young, and for your question, citizens, as well as there's a lot of organizations that support democracy initiatives, they are designing tools, let's say mechanisms, to mitigate the challenges of democratization and, well, increase the changes that democracy will maybe work better and contribute to meeting their needs, let's say. And this includes tools to improve participation, increase transparency and accountability. While, let's say, the democracy's idea remains attractive in my country, because democracy is very young in my country, and much remains to be done in terms of designing, adapting the tools necessary for it to work in practice, that of transparency, because we need a lot of transparency. And as I was looking at the presentation of Jibril, I've seen that really there's no community engagement, so that's a problem, and that's where the democracy are being left out.
Thank you. Thank you. Alan, or
Yes.
Let me just give some input. Yeah, if I can go ahead with the question. From Liberia, I think if we do a survey with other kinds of governance systems and looking at democracy, I think democracy will have a way ahead. Why? Because, historically, Liberia is the oldest independent republic in Africa. Got its independence in 1847. And since then, there was almost, we say, democratic rule then, because we had transfer of power from 1847 to 1980 when we had our first coup. And at that time, the president was assassinated. We had the coming in of a military regime, and that in a way caused some havoc. In fact, after the military regime, we went to a long period of conflict. Spending over 14 years. So when the country returned to democratic rule around 2003, and then until then, kind of transfer of power coming. So I think people love that more because of the lesson that's been taught by the coup d'etat that took place. That was doing that. In fact, people would think even currently those who make some statements against or trying to support other ways of governance, they always come to back logics. And in fact, there is still a push for those who are caused undemocratic practices in the country to be persecuted through a World Economic Crime Court, which is currently being pushed. So if you ask whether people are passionate, yes, to some extent, because I think people need liberty. It's just because some of the leaders given a chance sometimes end up dashing the hopes and aspirations of the people and not governing them accordingly, and that in a way can prompt some water other things. But I think democracy is ahead, and people, I believe, in my country, will love that more than any other form of governance. Thank you.
We'll give Alan the last comment. We only have 1 minute left.
Okay. In my country, Zambia, I would safely say people are very involved in terms of participating, and they are very eager to promote democratic tenets within governance. And this is exhibited in many ways. As next month we are voting, for the presidential, parliamentary, and local government officers. And we have seen quite a huge number of people turning up to be candidates and the like. So at that level, people are participating. And then in terms of whether a leader who is an authoritarian, what is my take on that part? I would safely say, if someone is an authoritarian and is doing fine, I would urge them to tread carefully and probably create an environment where they have a safe exit. Because if they keep the path of being an authoritarian, well, in most cases, they have ended up not exiting properly or through a coup. So for me, I would still support that, in as much as in certain instances you need authoritarian leadership, there is need for you to create a platform for those that shall come probably, or create room for democracy to actually thrive, even if you went through leadership through authoritarian means or any other way, but at some stage maybe you took that route. So that would be my take.
Yeah, Ashara, very briefly, because we're running out of time. In Uganda, you have a very elderly leader.
Thank you very much. I was actually not going to talk about Uganda in particular, because the truth is that listening to everyone speak. Sorry?
Please go ahead.
Sorry?
Please continue.
Yes, I was saying I was not going to talk about Uganda in particular, because every person has already talked about their country and we understand. I think Simche's something, she's not muted, so it keeps on interrupting, like there is air behind. Roberts, thank you so much. Yes, I was saying I was not going to talk about Uganda because every leader here has already spoken about their country, and we know that we have the similarities in all African countries because it is still a developing country or the still developing continent to some extent. If we look at democracy, we understand, I like connecting history to the future, and it was the cause of the common people, a force, you know, if you look at the Greek word, a force of the common people. So this means that in the earlier days, people would come amongst themselves and look to the potential leader or someone who could lead them in the direction that they wanted to go. But of course, we have human error, and something that started out as pure because people wanted to lead their countrymen or their community and their societies became corruptible after a certain point of time, because then people started inserting themselves in positions where they were not favored, but because they were using shrewd ways. So that messed up the entire democracy in most of the countries. So you have leaders who want to eat and eat without giving back to their fellows. And as leaders, what we have to ask ourselves is we have to go back to that basics of democracy, which means working together with the people on ground, the common people, to help elevate their problems and to help, elevate their questions and to put that in working. It's saying it's almost done. So thank you so much for the space, and I'm happy to be here.
We have a few seconds left.
Yeah, I'm on mute. So I'm wondering if, I can either summarize the discussion here, or we can have one of you speak. But I think I can summarize some of your findings. Okay, let's see you in the main room.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you very much.
Okay, we're all back together now. It looks like we are. All right, so I'm sorry we got cut off in our last comment from Sir Fred. Wing Kai, how do you want to proceed with the rest of this? Do you want to take a little extra time?
Yes, I think we can have 5-10 more minutes, but each group should just briefly spend 2 minutes, talk about what they have learned.
Okay, great. All right, so yeah, so our group, we were in the middle of a wonderful comment from Surfred that unfortunately got cut off. So we'd asked Piva to summarize our group's activities. Piva, do you just want to share a sort of key takeaway from our group discussion?
So in our group discussion, we had a lot of different challenges. Our other colleagues our other colleagues encounter. Like we talk about challenges with selflessness. We talk about challenges with communications. We had a colleague who grew up not knowing how to really communicate and shake it with communications. But how did she overcome this? She just decided that she would keep communicating no matter what. If you understand what she's saying, you will ask. If you don't understand where you stop her, she will correct it to build her confidence. So building her confidence was able to make her to overcome that obstacles in her communications. And another challenge was getting into work where you are young and you meet a group of your co-workers who have their own ideas on how they wish things should be. And you are getting into such system and you're trying to bring your own change to the system. How to bring them is kind of obstacles. You try to meet with your co-workers, you try to bring up communication, interact with them, make them to know that you are not there to take their jobs. You have come to work along with them as a leader. You recognize your flaws and you be able to identify with them, make them to know that, oh, okay, I'm not flawless. I have my flaws and I want us to work together. So communications in leadership is one of the key roles. And in fighting corruption, we have to be able to have good governance and good leadership that is communications as well. So that's the summary of our discussion. If
Thank you.
anyone want to add? Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, one quote from Anita really stands out for me. She was talking about this challenge of being a younger person in authority over older people who were kind of entrenched and thought they knew the right way to do everything. And she found it useful to say, you know, this isn't about me, right? This is about the public good and about public service. I'm not here in this position because I want to have power over you, right? And that was a really interesting, I think that summarized a lot of the themes in our discussion, right? A sort of challenge of both having that sort of self-confidence, as Piva mentioned, but also, you know, as Wendy stressed throughout, having this commitment to the public good and public service and it not being about ego. Again, that idea of servant leadership that we introduced last week. Wendy, did you want to say anything else?
No, I think that covers it. It's there's so much we could go on for many times. One of the things that I did assure our group was that those conversations, because people are revealing things about themselves, would remain confidential. So thanks, everyone.
Thank you. And our second group, Mike, do you have a reporter from your group?
Wing and I talked. I don't know whether Wing wanted to make some comments or we can go to some of our.
Yes, I think I'll start, and if some of our African fellows want to particularly emphasize the examples, Dr. Krisanik asked the question about the role of political leadership and how does it influence your country and your work, and because of the influence from the top. So a lot of the fellows were talking about the role of democracy in their countries. And we have two groups of countries. Certain groups of countries like Liberia and South Africa had a longer history of democratic systems in Africa. And they've gone through some changes over the last 20 years as well, especially in South Africa. So even though the system is there, there's still a work in progress and there's still problems in their democracies. And then we got to another group of countries like Zambia, Sierra Leone, or even bigger democracies like Nigeria, where there are a lot of problems of political corruption or political influence, either by individual political leaders or by not sharing the power to the people. And some of the fellows also talk about the lack of power for women in political leadership, and political process was cut off for women to participate in the process. So there's still a lot of restrictions and limitations for political participation. And Dr. Krisanik asked about the question whether our fellows are concerned or passionate about democracy, if the government is doing well or economically. And I think a lot of fellows still think that democratic values are important, but they also like the prosperity and stability of the country, which is the concern of the people as a whole. So are there any things that I missed that any of the fellows would like to add?
Okay, I think that was a great summary that you've done. I just want to put in just very quickly 2 points. Also about the alliance of the appointees and other people in the democratic process. Sometimes one of our colleagues from Zambia spoke about when appointment is made by the president. When the election is done, you also have some chance to appoint some people, especially the president. And most of the appointments are made based on close relatives. And then those who have been given the power are now accounting to the people. They're supposed to account to the people, but they are more accountable to the president as it may be. And also the point about having a one-party dominance in a country. Now, like South Africa, we got an example that having one party in charge with non-robust opposition that is weak, could also undermine the process of tracking, the process of accountability, transparency, and other things in the process. So I just wanted to put in that, but that was really great. Thank you.
Thank you, Charles.
Megan, I just want to say, if there's hope for democracy in sub-Saharan Africa, it is the fact that there's this underlying desire and passion to have people participate and have their voices heard, and we hear that from our fellows from Liberia, Sierra Leone, Nigeria, Zambia, Djibouti, and Uganda. There's a passion there. It may be stifled occasionally, and maybe pushed aside, but it still remains a very, very strong view. So I think that's one of the takeaways that I got out of our discussion today.
And Binyam, so Binyam, I think, was not in your group. He just asked, are we really condemned to go through benevolent dictators as a transition to democracy? Is there no other way? Right. And so did that question come up? You guys are kind of hinting around that, but what was the take in your group on that question? Right, which is something I have heard many people say over the years, right? Including in the United States, I think some people would be happy with a benevolent dictator, right? So what were some thoughts on that in your group?
I'll let the fellows speak.
Yeah, anyone there can respond. Anyone in group 2.
I think I can come in on that one.
Great.
Yes. For me, it's not always that we should get through the same route. Types of governance are different. And I was just a few days, I was reading through some happenings. Is it in this Swaziland about some, what is there now is there's a monarchy, but then people are protesting and we don't know where that would lead. But in essence, it's not always that it should be through a dictator for you to get through to democracy. But to some extent, if that is what is currently prevailing, that is exactly, you have that leader must be able to provide an opportunity or an environment where democracy is going to thrive. So if you happen to be that leader at that particular time, I would say provide an opportunity or an environment that is going to ensure that democracy actually thrives. Yeah.
That raises a really, really interesting current event among many things happening around the world in terms of democracy advocacy right now. Okay, so we have another question from Surfred, which is excellent. Do we want to take that, or should we move over to Jibril first?
Yeah, let's move over to Jibril.
Master
Yes.
ceremonies. Okay. All right. So Jibril.
Let's take the question. Let's take.
Oh, okay, sure. If that refers to our group, then yes.
Yeah. So your group has a lot of the provocative debate questions here. So Surfred asks, what is the role of Western democracies in undermining democracy in Africa? As a historian, I could say many things about that, but I'll hold back. What do our fellows think about that? Right? Because often we've been talking about sort of international collaboration for democracy promotion, but certainly there have been many historical and contemporary examples where meddling from other countries, particularly Western governments, can make democracy challenging. Any thoughts on that? Surfred, you raised the question, so if you want to say something more about that too.
I think this is maybe just perception. I think it would be necessary for those in the West to respond rather than those of us in Africa who have perhaps different understanding or perspective about that. Maybe there's something that we may be missing. So those in the West, I think will have better reputation to answer this question. That's just my thinking.
I think we have to look at ourselves in the mirror in the West as well, in the United States. And when we talk about democracy, it's not just, benevolence and bringing good to the world. And we also imposing our values to the world in a particular way. And sometimes doing it very aggressively and in a hegemonic way. And the legacy of colonialism in Europe also had its ugly face in the United States. We were, supporting a lot of wars and colonial legacies in the United States, in Africa as well. So there's a lot of mistrust of outsiders in a lot of African countries, not just towards China, but also towards the West in general. A lot of African nations want independence, want, nationalism, because their countries came out from this colonial history on the most part, except for a few, countries that have, shorter history. So I can understand that democracy is one side of the coin, but there's another side of the coin, which is colonialism, that we also have to look into that.
Yeah, I mean, and the legacy of the Cold War. I mean, I'm going to hold back from talking because I teach whole courses on this essentially. But if we look at our fellows from South Africa and from Zambia, from the region, know the history of Cold War meddling in Southern Africa well, for example, right, which sustains supposedly exclusively local civil wars in Angola and Mozambique for such a long time, right? There's a long history of reckoning that Western governments have to do. Surfred also raised this point about multinational corporations. And yeah, there's a lot to be said about this, right? And so, I think that these kind of transnational dimensions put even further strains, right, on all of us as leaders in our everyday interactions, right? Because clearly, we in our decisions that we make in our particular jobs can't undo these legacies single-handedly, right? But I think Jibril's group is speaking to how community civil engagement, that was something that Simche also mentioned, right? The importance of civic education, right? To know about these histories, to know about these legacies, to work to undo them. How can that change our future? So Jibril, do you want to speak to some key themes that came up in your group about, how we can overcome these legacies of colonialism and the Cold War and everything that's followed through greater sort of grassroots organizing?
Megan, real quickly, our fellows are coming here to the United States at a time in which I think we have to be honest among ourselves about our model of democracy, whether it works, whether we're providing people an opportunity to vote, whether people can have the opportunity to speak of clearly and forcefully, whether our institutions are working properly. Whether there is indeed an opportunity to have an election that is not put in question by some individuals. So we've had a model that we've advanced throughout the world in the post-colonial period, And we need to look at ourselves right now, and maybe our fellows will help us to look at ourselves, and perhaps we need to make some serious adjustments before we start talking about advancing a democratic model that comes out of our traditions.
Absolutely. Yeah. Jabril, do you want to speak to that, speak to what your group was discussing?
Well, our group was discussing community engagement, and also looking at, the concept we talked about, all of the different modules about how you do community engagement that came out of the presentation I did, inviting citizens as co-designers, co-implementers, initiators, all of these things being very critical, as well as looking at your psychosocial self, because it is very important for you to really have a good grasp and understanding of your own self-concept, your self-image. We talked about this, your self-esteem and your self-ideal. These are critical things to understand, because one of the ways we can ensure some of the mistakes that all of us made in the past, whether from the West or in Africa, there's been a history and a legacy of all kinds of mishaps and errors and social injustices, economic injustices. One of the ways we can start to actually change those is taking a closer look at who we are as leaders. That whole idea about what is your ideal self? What is your self-concept of being a leader? Because if you're going into leadership to position yourself for success on the backs of other people, we know what's going to happen. Whether you create a nonprofit organization, whether it's in Africa or here in the United States where we live, if you create a nonprofit organization and your intent is self-promotion and self-success, and you pretty much leverage citizens' vulnerabilities and their biases and everything else to get to where you need to be, ultimately, this is the time where, and somebody brought this in our conversation, I think it was Cornelius, maybe I get this wrong, who said that, no, actually it was Sarah. Sarah in our conversation raised the issue of leaders who engage with the community with a specific goal in mind. They want votes, and when they get the votes and get into office, they turn their backs in the community. And Sarah's question was, is that community engagement? And I said, absolutely not. That is not the community engagement we're looking for. That is not the community engagement we're talking about. And a lot of times that continue to repeat itself over and over and over. And we are hoping that you guys, as the next generation of leaders, will actually avoid that pitfall and realize that actually when you engage in community, there are authentic, scientifically proven ways of doing this. How do you make ordinary citizens as co-designers, co-implementers, and initiators of work? Dr. Jabbar can talk about this. He made a wonderful comment around creating spaces. How do you create space in a community where people's voices are heard? And I've given the example of, if it requires for you to go from house to house to talk to people about their concern and collect their ideas and thoughts, to work with community leaders, to organize community events where you will gather thoughts and ideas and ensure that the people's thoughts and ideas are included in the policy making. Therefore, when the policy is made, the citizen can see themselves in the policy. But if you already have a policy already cooked, baked, ready to go, and you just come to the citizen and you said, well, here is the policy, which was Sarah was talking about, where she said that the government has policies and some funding. And when they invite citizens and community base to participate and voice what they want to see happen, nobody comes, nobody participates. And Sarah's question was, how do we do this? And I said, well, you didn't engage them from the beginning. So pretty much you're coming to them with a policy already baked, ready to go. And the citizens are looking at you just like, we do not see ourselves in this policy you're presenting to us. And as a result, people disengage with the community. And hopefully, you as leaders will be able to really develop yourself that you don't make the same mistakes that is being made, repeated over and over again. I mean, one last thing I would say before I finish, you know, and let's be very candid about this. Democracy is never finished. It's always a work in progress. There is no way in the world where you have a finished, complete democracy. It's always a work in progress. And it always changes based on economic situation, demographics, political situation, political parties. So it's always moving with the time. Now, you as leaders, can you learn to adapt and adjust to the changing nature of democracy, not only in your country, but also in our own country, in the West, and across the world? That is the question. Ask yourself that question. Don't have this conception that this is democracy, this is it, and it's done and it's over with. But keep an open mind. This is part of understanding your self-concept and your ideal self. That democracy, my ability to be an effective leader is my ability to adapt to the changing nature of democracy as a system that changes with time, with political leaders, with economic situation, with generational situation. Because if you are able to do that, you will be able to actually find the type of democracy that fit in within the context and speak to the context of what you're doing. In the United States, we have a messy democracy, but it is a democracy. It's always changing. It's messy. We battle it out. Sometimes we agree, we don't disagree. But guess what? That is the beauty and the part of what democracy is, because it's if we don't want a democracy that stops, set in stone. We want a democracy that we can fight about and battle over and disagree on and have conflicts about. And I think that's what makes the American democracy work, because we fight over it. We reinforce certain things and we reinvent it as we go along. So for you leaders in Africa, don't idealize this democracy that is set in stone, but instead learn to adapt to the changing nature of democracy. And the messiness of democracy is actually part of the beauty of what democracy is.
So thank you so much. So those are excellent thoughts. We have one more question from Charles. We'll take it. If you guys need to leave, you can leave. I know we're way over time, but Charles asks a really provocative closing question. How do we apply these concepts as citizens, as co-implementators, co-designers, and co-initiators when an organization is already established, right? So if we're working for, you know, a really entrenched organization, how do we apply those principles as opposed to starting something from the ground up? Any thoughts on that? Yes, Jabbar.
So thank you so much. Just sure, you know, I gave an example. All members of United Nations as countries, one country, two countries, they initiate something for their countries and other countries. So, you know, take it locally and engage the local leaders and the citizens. They should be able to initiate something, a project that they feel there is a need for it, because most of the time, especially in that, you know, most of the world where you have authoritarian governments, they think they know more. And so we need to be able to really enable the local leaders, create a space for them, as Dr. Jibril mentioned. And of course, we always go to the typical well-known spaces such as churches, mosques, temples. No, these are for, you know, for worshippers to go. Create public space where people then create what we call it the community of the willing, those the initiators, because they'll be willing to work with you on that project. So take that, the United Nations, look to the history and see most of the really great resolutions and projects from UNICEF, UNESCO came from individual countries. And I think, based on the evidence now, I think citizens can do the same. So go to your local leaders, engage them, listen to them, not just talk at them. engage them, and take their ideas, adopt their ideas, and start the work. Without that, I see no engagement. If top-down communication, we have to reverse it, grassroots up communication. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much for those insights, Jafar. It's wonderful to have you back with us. So Chisholm has one more question. I'll put that on the discussion board because we're quite over time at this point. But Chisholm asks another excellent question about how we sort of streamline the process to get citizens more involved, whether we're working with an established organization like the United Nations or a newly formed NGO. So thank you all so much. Thank you to our panelists, both for their recording and for our wonderful, fruitful discussion today. I'm sorry again for our technical difficulties. Wing Kai raised his hand. Do you have an announcement? Or?
Yes, I like to remind all the fellows next week is we do not have any virtual sessions, but you will be receiving an email from Dr. Megan later today about some of the resources you will be, be able to access next week. So that next week you'll be working on your asynchronous sessions, all the videos and modules that you have not had a chance to read, and all the focus project you're thinking about to do, and all the Ignite Talk. If you really want to compete for the Ignite Talk spot for the summit, you have to submit it before July 7th. So there's a lot of things you can think about if you want to really present your leadership style to the entire institute. You have to nominate yourself to IREX directly before July 7th. In this group, we will have all of you to have your accountability partner to do your Ignite Talk, and eventually you will vote for 3 people to represent this institute, and they will have a chance to present in the last week on July 28th. So those are the Ignite Talks, and also the community service assignments that Kemi helped us to sign up. We will be collecting the last assignments for people. If you have not emailed us, you should do it today or tomorrow. Then we'll be finalizing that assignment. There's still some room left for the one on homelessness and for the one on gun violence. Unfortunately, the youth and education and the public health are already full, but they are all good. You can learn about all 4 subjects eventually. So I hope I'm not missing. There's so many different.
That's it. And again, look out for my summary email. Won't miss a detail. So you guys can enjoy catching up and sort of looking ahead next week. And we'll look forward to seeing you again next on Monday, July 12th. That sounds impossibly far away, but yes.
Keep in mind that it will be 1 hour earlier. So this week we start at 5 GMT, and next on July 12th, we'll at least for July 12th, we start at 4 GMT. When you schedule your appointment with your coach, if there's a conflict with the session, and you should reschedule your meeting with your coaches. So you will be attending our virtual session together as a group.
And again, if anyone is having trouble getting in touch with their coach, please reach out to me. I've heard a lot of good feedback. I haven't heard many negative things yet. That doesn't, of course, mean everything is fine. So please don't be shy if you have any concerns, and I can help facilitate your connections with your coach. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, everybody. Have a good week next week.
We'll look forward
to seeing you again.
10 days.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.